Have I ever told you about the time I tried to create a brand around the sports that I was competing in? It failed for the most part, but that's part of the process of finding yourself. I'm obviously still looking for myself, that is. And I still don't know what that's going to be, but even if I can't tell you what it's going to be, I can tell you what it's not going to be. It's not going to happen as an athlete, or at least not as a runner. That much I can tell you. A couple of years ago, I started a site called Full Contact Runner. Clever, I know. The idea behind the site was that it was going to be a mashup of my previous fighting experience and my newfound love of running and competing in running events. The plan with this site was to share my running experiences and the best practices that I had discovered as I went along competing in all of these different events. I wanted to share my experiences as an athlete, as a personal trainer, as a coach. I was doing all these different things that were either running related or running adjacent. Full Contact Runner seemed like the ideal way to communicate all of those experiences to the people that were interested in them. I had a catchphrase that went along with it. Nothing hits harder than the ground. I felt like it was just a really good mashup of my amateur and professional fighting experience, my martial arts background, and the idea that I was returning to running and committing to it again as an athlete. Yeah. I figured I had a pretty good package going. I'm not gonna lie. I'm not saying that to be cocky. I just thought it was kind of a neat idea. Full Contact Runner, former martial artist, somebody who specializes in not specializing, working through all of these different race goals using a lot of cross training and some experiences that people might not automatically recognize. Lessons that I learned from martial arts, from boxing, from wrestling, and even powerlifting. I took all of those lessons and tried to apply them to the running space. It's not that it was a complete failure. It wasn't so much that, but the success that I had with it was modest at best. Even if the brand Full Contact Runner didn't do as well as I hoped it would do, it did okay. It did well enough that I was willing to maintain it for at least a couple of years. And it's still up now if you're interested in checking it out. But trying to create that site and that brand was valuable, even though I would consider it a bit of a failure. Regardless, the time I put into Full Contact Runner was worthwhile. And it was worthwhile for a couple of reasons. One of those reasons is that it brought me to this point, and it allows me to impart a couple of lessons when it comes to how somebody should cope with failure. If there's anything to be gleaned from the idea that Full Contact Runner wasn't a success in the way I was hoping it would be, it's that it totally feeds into this idea of being resilient and not letting your failures define you. I think that the key to failing well is twofold, and I could drill down into this further, but for the purposes of this video, I think it's important that we recognize there are two key factors, in my opinion, when it comes to failing well. The kind of failures where you don't carry a lot of regret with you after the fact. The first key to failing well is meticulous planning. I planned out Full Contact Runner as far as the site, the content, and the social media platforms that I would create to support it in a methodical and well thought out manner. That meticulous planning means that when I reach this stage where I feel like Full Contact Runner is a failure, I'm not looking back with regret. Self-care and compassion in the face of failure, directed at yourself in particular, is important as far as not breaking yourself down, because the goal is we want to move forward, don't we? The second key to failing well is, if you're going to fail, fail fast. Don't drag it out, and don't cling to something that you should have let go long ago. This requires quite a bit of self-reflection. You have to know yourself in order to know when it's time to close up shop. And for full contact runner, that time is now. And fast is relative, just like in the running world. I gave myself a 3-year window to build up full contact runner, and it arguably peaked at about the 2-year mark. Recognizing that, combined with the meticulous planning, means that I'm not going to stretch out full contact runner for as long as I can just based on ego or stubbornness or vanity. It failed, I failed, but it failed and I failed fast. I can fail and move on. I don't have to sit there and wallow in the failure. For the most part, anything that you take on as a challenge shouldn't be a life sentence. When it comes to taking on challenges, you have to know where your exits are. When you recognize that failure is just a natural part of trying to be successful, when you embrace the idea of meticulous planning and the counter idea of failing fast, all of a sudden, failure doesn't seem like a thing that defines who you are. It doesn't define your worth and it doesn't define your value. Failure is just this thing you go through on occasion on your way to the next success. There's a story that when Caesar would return to Rome, the conquering hero, after all his exploits, he would have a slave ride with him as he came into town. While everybody else was clapping and applauding and cheering Caesar on for all of his victories, he made sure that the slave was right beside him, and he had that slave whisper in his ear that all glory is fleeting. I'm going to add to it that if all glory is fleeting, then failure is even more so. I'm going to suggest that for the most part, runners weren't ready for that.